For years, we've all heard of the glories of ancient Egypt and their technological marvels. Countless movies, articles, games, and other media, including this channel, talk up how incredible it was, and the folks on Ancient Aliens have attributed it almost all to magical alien technology because of course they have. However, the truth is that for the people of ancient Egypt, things were not nearly so amazing as we imagine, and many of them would have thought that we were the ones who truly lived like kings, which is kind of totally expected when you think about it. Let's get into it. Number 10. Dental problems were common, and sand grains in bread may have played a role. Many times when you hear about ancient Egypt, you will hear all about the incredible innovations that they had in regards to their teeth. They were known for being one of the earliest cultures to use both toothpaste and toothbrushes as well. Truly amazing. This might give people the idea that ancient Egyptians had some of the best teeth in the ancient world, especially as we imagine that sugar wasn't as big in their diets as it is today. But the reality is that ancient Egyptians had really horrible teeth, and that's why they came up with innovations like the toothbrush. It was just due to necessity. Ancient Egyptians lived in an extremely sandy environment, as you might imagine, and since they didn't have advanced technology or all of the insulation and other vacuums and things that we have today, the sand was pretty much in everything all the time, and you really couldn't get rid of it entirely, sort of like sand in your picnic at the beach. For this reason, ancient Egyptians were always getting grit in their food, especially their bread, which was the most common thing that they ate. This, along with regularly enjoying beer or wine if they were rich and fancy, and having diets full of sweet dates and honey, again, only if you were a rich man, this led to a whole bunch of terrible dental problems that they were constantly trying to find solutions for. Number 9. Lead-based makeup helped fight infections, but also caused harm. Many ancient cultures were known to use lead-based makeup, and now many cultures shake our heads in dismay at their stupidity, knowing in hindsight how toxic lead really is when it's put directly on your skin, or even when it's not. And many find it even more amusing, or sad, due to the fact that our cultures tended to use it just for decoration in an attempt to get a really nice black look around the eyes. However, while the ancient Egyptians may not have been advanced enough to realize that lead was toxic, they did figure out a compound they mixed mostly of lead could help fight eye infections, something that was common among ancient Egyptian people, both due to the constant sand getting in people's eyes and diseases from the Nile River. Ancient Egypt makeup samples from the Louvre have been found to contain lead-based compounds that can boost nitric oxide in human skin cells, something that greatly boosts our body's immune system response, which is helpful in fighting infections. Some of the compounds would have had to have been synthesized, which means a lot of work from ancient Egyptian scientists and doctors likely went into making these makeup compounds. Unfortunately, they had no idea that, while curing that infection, they were also putting poisonous lead all over their eyes. Number 8. Because of lice worries, people had to shave their entire bodies constantly. It was incredibly hot in ancient Egypt, big shocker, and back then people didn't have showers, running water all the time, nor did they have modern air conditioning. Again, you probably know that, although the guys in Ancient Aliens might disagree. They're wrong. Along with that, they didn't have modern medicine either, nor all of the tools for hygiene that we do today. For this reason, finding ways to stay cool, avoid disease, stay clean easier, and avoid awful pests like lice was really important. Because of that, most ancient Egyptians shaved their heads entirely, and many sources contend that they regularly shaved the rest of their bodies as well, and we don't just mean the women. Especially for any women watching this, you know what it's like to shave more than your face, and it can be difficult to imagine just how much of a regular chore this must have been for everyone living in ancient Egypt. Shaving your entire body regularly without modern tools and avoiding infection or scrapes on your skin had to be quite an ordeal. Many people might feel that this also would affect fashion, with most of the women being balls, but they actually just wore wigs most of the time, especially among the upper class. Among the pharaohs, of course, fancy golden headdresses were common to hide their baldness and show off their wealth and power. I should get one myself. Number 7. Ancient Egyptians had to worry about hippopotamuses swamping their boats. One thing people don't realize is that the creature that kills the most people in Africa every year isn't even a carnivore. It's actually the hippopotamus beloved by American children, despite its massively aggressive disposition and its horrifying power. Hippopotamuses are the only creature that ever really freaked out Steve Irwin, who carefully crossed a river with his crew rather than trying to mess with them for fun. Now, while they may not live on the Nile River anymore today, they certainly did back in the days of ancient Egypt, and they were sometimes considered to be a bad omen because of how dangerous they were. They could easily swamp boats, drag people under, and drown them, and just out of sheer aggression, they could maul people to death with their huge mouths and teeth, even if they had no interest in eating them. They are so vicious that they might even have killed a pharaoh. While there are many theories on how King Tut died, a more recent theory suggests that he was bitten to death by a hippo while out hunting, possibly while hunting hippos, which is something the upper class did occasionally do. The support for this theory is that the pharaoh had damage to his ribs and was mummified without his heart or part of his chest wall, which some believe could support the idea that the pharaoh was mauled to death while hunting the most dangerous game in Africa. Number 6. Pharaohs usually had bad teeth, heart disease, and obesity. Now, some people might imagine that the pharaohs, being the richest of the rich, would have the most access to the best foods and would be healthier than other ancient Egyptians. This misconception is easy to believe because the richer Egyptians usually did have access to meat, vegetables, and a chance to have a somewhat varied diet, and typical artworks depict the pharaohs as thin. However, evidence from actual mummies show that many of the pharaohs were quite fat and extremely unhealthy, dying at an age that was young even for their time period, especially for someone with their amount of money and access to the best healthcare in the kingdom. The thing is, pharaohs had pretty much all the power they could want and usually skewed quite young, even by older world standards, at least when they first hit the throne. With no one to tell them about moderation, many of their diets consisted almost entirely of honey, wine, or beer, or both, and bread. This binging on a combination of carbs, alcohol, and pure cane sugar led to severe dental problems, hardening of the arteries, and other heart problems, and obesity. Evidence also shows that much of the upper class also ate in a similar way when they could, likely because they didn't fully understand the health consequences, so even if you were a high-class ancient Egyptian, you were likely to deal with a lot of health problems from a very poor diet. Number 5. Crocodile dung, with its alkaline properties, was used as a spermicide. Today, we have a lot of advanced birth control options. There are pills women take on a regular basis to prevent pregnancy. We have many options for condoms, which have improved greatly since they were made from things like sheepskin. And there are other things like the diaphragm that work with spermicide to prevent pregnancy. However, if you lived in the days of ancient Egypt, you may have had to deal with a much grosser way of attempting to avoid pregnancy. You see, in the days of ancient Egypt, and this is going to come as a shock, they didn't have, silicone molded objects or modern spermicide. However, they did want something similar, so they mixed crocodile dung with sour milk and formed it into a paste and then shoved it into their vaginas to make a sort of plug. Some researchers believe that as disgusting and unsanitary as this was, it might have actually worked, since crocodile dung does have alkaline properties which would have made it a decent spermicide. However, it is unlikely anyone will even theoretically learn whether it works or not, as it would not just be an unethical experiment, it would also be totally disgusting. Number 4. Jails weren't really a thing, so punishments were extremely harsh. In ancient Egypt, they didn't really have the kind of long-term jailing that we have now, as they didn't consider it to be productive. To have someone taking up food and other resources while sitting in a cage and not working would have just been pretty wasteful, but that doesn't mean that people didn't get punished. If someone was found guilty of a crime, punishments also involved being badly beaten or lashed or given some other strict physical penalty, up to and including death. And of course, sometimes financial penalties were also involved, but those sound a lot milder. However, some Egyptologists have been puzzled for years as to whether some of the more extreme punishments had really been enacted. After all, we have some silly laws on the books in modern times that would never pass muster in a court of law. One that was considered particularly extreme stated that for some more extreme or violent crimes that didn't warrant execution, they would be given 100 lashes and 5 wounds. While it was so extreme, researchers weren't sure whether it was real. A recent discovery has found skeletons that confirmed that punishments like this did happen to at least a few men, although we'll never know what their particular crimes were. According to experts who examined the bones, the wounds were given on their backs with a spear, and the gouges were expertly done so they could keep living and working afterwards. Number 3. Forced suicide could sometimes be a punishment for crimes. Actually punishing someone with death was relatively rare in ancient Egypt to begin with, even with the lack lack of prisons. People simply didn't find a need to kill each other that often, which was usually the only reason someone was actually executed. However, when someone was punished with death, it could be much tougher on you depending on what you did. If they felt you were truly evil and had sinned against the gods, they might burn your body or impale you, two methods that could potentially cut you off from having a proper chance at a good afterlife. In some cases, though, you could actually be punished by being told to kill yourself, with it being presumed that if you didn't, someone would do it for you. One situation where this occurred was with the harem plot against Pharaoh Ramesses III. Several of the conspirators had to commit suicide, while some were killed and other minor players had their noses and ears cut off. Egyptologists who have studied the texts surrounding this and other references to forced suicide have struggled to find a single unifying reason as to why it was chosen as a punishment over execution. Number 2. The ancient Egyptian diet wasn't varied and nutritional deficiencies were common. As we mentioned earlier, the pharaohs had a pretty bad diet, but there is also the diet of the common folk that we should talk about. While some of the upper class could afford meat on a more regular basis and even more vegetables, even though we know some chose to eat a much worse diet anyway, the common folk really did not have this option. Most ancient Egyptians couldn't afford meat except on special occasions and didn't even eat that many vegetables regularly either. Most ancient Egyptian diets consisted largely of bread, and this was often supplemented with things like figs and dates and honey if they could afford it. The common people drank a lot of beer, while the upper classes tended to drink wine, as we mentioned before. This led to all kinds of nutritional deficiencies, especially with iron, as they had almost no source for this. The reality was that unless you were rich, you had basically no shot of having a balanced diet. Number 1. Ancient Egyptians had to worry about multiple types of parasitic worms. Back in the days of the ancient Egyptians, they didn't have the kind of footwear choices that we had today. Obviously, this meant that foot problems were pretty common. Walking on sand, also not awesome for feet, and most people were just wearing super basic sandals. However, even worse was working in water. If they were wading into water for work or fun, they had the risk of schistosoma worm getting into their bodies through their feet and then wreaking havoc on their internal organs. They would also weaken their immune system overall, so that it was easier for them to die from an infection. And to make it even worse, they could end up dealing with the guinea worm as well, which entered the body through contaminated drinking water. The guinea worm would then travel down to the legs, doing damage on the way down so that it could lay its eggs in its preferred spot. They could also get regular old hookworms as well, which could cause iron deficiency, anemia, and all kinds of lovely other symptoms. Again, just be glad you live in the future, people. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do smash that like button below and do not forget to subscribe. We got brand new videos every day of the week. For more from me, why not check out another channel I do called Geographics? We cover geography on that channel. It is linked to below. And thank you for watching.